Well, now it may take the whistleblower who's come forward, who has given the committee emails from one of Dr. Fauci's top aides. And those emails show Dr. David Morens apparently used his personal email to talk about the pandemic and get around federal transparency laws. So meet me on the private line. He also told the committee during a separate interview, quote, "I will delete anything I don't want to see in the New York Times." Wow. At one point, Morens talks about a 2019 grant proposal with a company which wanted funding to create a novel coronavirus before the pandemic. To create a novel coronavirus before the pandemic. They're working on it. The number highlighted corresponds to a project titled Understanding the Risk of Bat Corona Emergence. This evidence is raising some new questions, as you might imagine, over why Dr. Fauci called the lab leak theory a conspiracy so many times and denied there was government funding for the research. Senator Rand Paul says this is game over.
Game over, gang. We're going to hear exactly what Senator Rand Paul has to say about Fauci getting caught red-handed. This is going to absolutely make your day. And then you won't believe what's happening in the nation of Japan in response to the World Health Organization's latest pandemic treaty. We're going to see how patriots in Japan are rising up to make sure that that treaty never sees the light of day. You are not going to want to miss this. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your Patriot Professor, here to help you stay sane in these insane times. So make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button, and let's dive right in. It's being widely reported that Senator Rand Paul is, in effect, blowing the lid off of major federal agencies that have been allegedly concealing facts that they knew about the pandemic that clearly contradict what Anthony Fauci testified to under oath. The latest involves allegedly secret trips by Fauci to the CIA, of all places. Now, the reason why that's so significant is because we now have a whistleblower from the CIA who testified that he was part of an investigative scientific committee that voted 6-1 that the virus did indeed come from a lab originally. But those findings were subsequently overruled by superiors at the CIA. Obviously, the agency's reversals in its secretive meetings with Fauci are suspicious, especially given the fact that we now know that Fauci knew that the lab leak theory was a very plausible theory early on in the pandemic timeline. You heard at the beginning of this video about the whistleblower who shared more COVID origins emails that an advisor to Fauci actually concealed on a private account. And these emails appear to corroborate a report by the Wall Street Journal several months back that found that the National Institutes of Health, under the directorship of Fauci, actually funded the Wuhan lab's research through an organization known as the EcoHealth Alliance to the tune of nearly $4 million. And not only that, but that funding appears to involve creating new coronaviruses in the lab. And according to Senator Paul, these emails are game over for Fauci.
This was his own agency. We now have proof that the NIH and the NIAID, Fauci's agency, knew about this proposal and were part of the proposal, despite him continuing in public to say he knew nothing of this proposal. This basically is the smoking gun that ties Anthony Fauci and NIH to the funding of research that may well have led to COVID-19.
So there you have it. Gain-of-function research in a Wuhan lab funded by Fauci's department, and they did everything they could to keep a lid on that, especially in view of how much money was being made by Big Pharma in all of this. And speaking of that, gang, you know, another thing Big Pharma is doing is they're trying to get in between you and some really amazing products. So, for example, I've been taking this amazing new supplement called NMN from our sponsor, Black Forest, gang. I am serious when I say I don't know how I managed without it. The boost to my energy levels, my mental clarity, my overall well-being, it's just so good. But did you know the FDA is actually trying to get in the way of this? It's true. The FDA is actually in the process of potentially reclassifying NMN, which stands for nicotinamide mononucleotide, as a drug instead of a supplement, which in the end only serves the interests of big pharmaceutical companies because now they can control its distribution, leaving you and me, the consumer, out in the cold. And it's no wonder why they want to do this. Studies have shown that NMN can provide numerous health benefits such as improved energy, weight management, endurance, strength, even anti-aging. But the good news is that despite the controversy of this big pharma attack, you still have a window of opportunity to take advantage of this supplement. Our sponsor, Black Forest, has the best NMN supplement on the market. Trust me, I love it. And if you click on that link below right now, you can take advantage of their buy two, get one free special just for our audience. But that's only for the next 48 hours. So don't wait. Click on that link below right now and enjoy this amazing supplement while you still can today. Tens of thousands of protesters came out in the Shinjuku area of Tokyo to protest the latest proposal coming out of the World Health Organization, which is a pandemic treaty that spells out the rules nations will be bound to comply with in the event of another global pandemic. Japanese media is reporting that it was a stunning protest. Demonstrators came from all over Japan, from the southernmost island of Okinawa to the northernmost island of Hokkaido. They were expecting only a few thousand to show up, but as you could see, the turnout was absolutely enormous, tens of thousands. Protesters carried banners saying, "Down with the pandemic treaty, don't force the vaccines on us, don't let the WHO bully us, and show us what the treaty really says." The massive sea of protesters are obviously putting lots of pressure on the Japanese government to turn down the pandemic treaty. Now, at one level, this is specific to Japan in that the relationship between Japan and China has been further strained as a result of the pandemic. Japan generally sees the WHO as kowtowing to China, perhaps even being in China's pocket. The Japanese generally don't trust the WHO after they saw how it failed to stand up to China after the pandemic. But that said, there is something also rather universal going on here in Japan. As it turns out, many Japanese are actually very suspicious of the WHO and the vaccines in general. One of the major studies on the possible adverse reactions and side effects of the vaccines came out of Japan. It was a 2021 investigation by Japanese scientists and the causal relationship between vaccine usage and deaths. So Japan has been no stranger to addressing the controversy over the way the WHO and other international agencies handled the pandemic. And it's pretty clear that a sizable portion of the Japanese population continues to harbor those concerns. Now, interestingly, Japan isn't alone. Politico is reporting that more and more countries are lining up and saying, you know what? We want nothing to do with any one-size-fits-all techno treaty coming out of the WHO. And it's very interesting because we talked in an earlier video just today about this growing phenomenon known as delegitimization, which involves a growing distrust and suspicion towards public institutions that are seen as no longer serving the public interest, but rather serving special interests. And that kind of delegitimization isn't just happening here. As you can see, it's coming out of Japan, where more and more populations perceive what they consider to be a very menacing and malevolent partnership developing between international bureaucrats and transnational corporations like Big Pharma. They no longer believe that these bureaucrats have their best interests in mind. These bureaucrats are far more motivated by personal profit and the benefiting of the ruling class as a whole than they are about what's in the best interest for the general population at large. And so it looks like this WHO treaty is on its way to the ash heap of history. We'll most certainly keep our eyes on how things develop here. But if what's happening here in the States and in Japan are any indicator, things aren't looking so good for big government and big pharma.